A human maid was serving blood in the vampire court when the vampire king saw her mark and stopped moving. The crystal cups clinked with a sound like breaking bones. Each cup was filled with red liquid that was not wine. Sarah's hands shook as she carried the silver tray through the big room. She was careful not to spill even one drop of the special blood. If she wasted any, it would mean death or something even worse. The Crimson Palace lived up to its name tonight. Hundreds of candles made shadows dance across marble walls that were stained red from hundreds of years of feeding. Vampire nobles wore silk and velvet. They sat on golden chairs like beautiful hunters. Their white skin seemed to glow in the flickering light. Their ruby-red eyes watched every movement of the human servants running between tables. Don't look them in the eyes, Sarah reminded herself. She kept looking at the shiny floor. Don't give them any reason to notice you. But it was impossible not to hear them. The raids on the eastern villages have been very successful. A female vampire with bright white hair said sweetly to her friend. Though I do miss the days when humans fought back more. The fear made their blood so much sweeter. Her friend laughed. It sounded like silver bells mixed with screams. Patience, my dear. Lord Kale says the resistance is growing stronger. Soon we'll have proper hunting again. Sarah's jaw tightened as she refilled their cups. The metallic smell of human blood made her stomach turn. She had been here for 3 months. 3 months of pretending to be just another broken servant girl. And the urge to show who she really was grew stronger every day. The silver mark hidden under her long sleeve seemed to burn against her skin. It was a crescent moon mixed together with a dagger. This was the ancient symbol of the Order of Vampire Hunters. If any of these monsters discovered what she really was, they would tear her apart before she could blink. You there, girl? Sarah's heart stopped. A vampire lord with cruel green eyes was staring right at her. His voice cut through all the other talking. More blood. And be quick about it. Of course, my lord, she whispered, bowing her head like a good servant while anger burned in her chest. This was Lord Kais, one of Kale's war generals. He was responsible for the massacre at Millbrook, her hometown. She had watched from the woods as he personally drained her neighbor's children. As she hurried toward the serving area, the huge doors at the far end of the hall burst open. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as every vampire in the room fell silent and bowed their heads. Vampire King Kale had arrived, even from across the huge hall. His presence was crushing. He was tall and broad-shouldered with jet black hair and eyes like winter storms. He moved with hunting grace that made other predators look clumsy. His midnight blue coat was decorated with silver thread that seemed to eat up light. A crown of blackened metal sat on his head like a statement of complete power. Sarah had only seen him twice before. Both times she had been struck by how young he looked. Maybe 30 in human years, even though he had been ruling the vampire kingdom for over 300 years. His face looked carved from marble, beautiful and terrible, with sharp cheekbones and lips that had never known a real smile. My faithful subjects, Kale's voice filled the hall without him raising it. It commanded attention like a force of nature. Tonight we celebrate another victory against the human rebellion. The village of Thornfield has fallen, and their so-called hunter sanctuary burns as we speak. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Thornfield. Her contact there, Marcus, was one of the few surviving members of her order. He had been gathering information about vampire weaknesses. If they had found him, the vampires burst into cheers and bloodthirsty clapping. But Sarah barely heard them over the roaring in her ears. She gripped the tray so tightly her knuckles went white. She fought every instinct that screamed at her to draw the silver dagger hidden in her boot and charge. Not yet, she told herself. You're not ready. You need more information, more time to plan. However, Kale continued. His storm-gray eyes scanned the crowd with cold calculation. Disturbing reports have reached my ears. Human settlements are disappearing faster than our forces can explain. Entire villages vanishing without a trace, leaving no survivors, no blood, no evidence of our presence. A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembled vampires. Sarah forced herself to keep moving. She refilled cups and pretended not to care while hanging on every word. Some whisper of a new player in this ancient war, the Vampire King said. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. Something that hunts both vampire and human alike. General Kais, what news from your scouts? The green-eyed vampire rose from his seat. His face looked troubled. Nothing solid, my lord. But the timing is unusual. The missing villages show signs of struggle, yet no bodies remain. It's almost as if something collected them. Collected them? Sarah's mind raced. What could make both vampires and humans disappear so completely? Double the patrols, Kale commanded. I want answers, not mysteries. This war will end with vampire victory, not chaos. His eyes swept across the hall one final time. For a heart-stopping moment, Sarah could have sworn his gaze lingered on her. But then he turned away, moving toward the high table where the most powerful vampire lords waited to report their conquests. Sarah released a breath she didn't know she had been holding and continued her rounds. Her mind spun with questions. As she served the last table near the edge of the hall, she overheard two younger vampires whispering in urgent tones. Did you hear about the incident at Ravencroft? One hissed. They found vampire bodies drained of blood, just like humans. What kind of creature drinks vampire blood? Shush, his companion warned. Such talk borders on treason. Lord Kale says it's human lies meant to frighten us. But as Sarah glanced back at the Vampire King, she noticed something others might have missed. Despite his commanding presence and confident words, there was tension in the line of his shoulders. There was a tightness around his eyes that spoke of real concern. Whatever was happening in the shadows of this war, it had even the monsters worried. And somehow Sarah doubted that was good news for anyone. The feast had reached its peak when disaster struck. Sarah was moving between the crowded tables. Her tray was filled with fresh cups of blood. That's when Lord Aldrich, a particularly mean vampire known for his love of human suffering, stumbled right into her path. His pale face was flushed with blood wine. His movements were sluggish from drinking too much. Watch where you're going, blood bag, he snarled, purposely shoving his shoulder into hers. The impact sent Sarah stumbling backward. Time seemed to slow as she watched the silver tray slip from her hands. Crystal cups flew through the air in a shower of red. The precious blood splashed across the white marble floor. And horror of horrors, it splashed directly onto the high table where King Kale sat with his inner circle. The entire hall fell silent. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as every pair of glowing eyes turned toward her. The spilled blood pooled on the ancient oak table. It stained documents and soaked into the embroidered tablecloth that had probably cost more than most humans earned in a lifetime. You clumsy little wretch! Lord Aldrich roared. His fangs extended in rage. Do you have any idea what you've done? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Sarah stammered. She dropped to her knees and frantically tried to clean the mess with her apron. Please, it was an accident. Accident? Aldrich's laugh was pure evil. You've ruined the king's table with your human filth. This is treason. Sarah reached desperately for the scattered cups. She stretched across the table to gather the crystal pieces before they could shatter further. In her panic, she didn't notice her sleeve sliding up her arm as she reached out, but King Kale did. The torchlight caught the silver mark on her inner forearm. A crescent moon mixed together with a dagger. It seemed to glow with its own ghostly light against her pale skin. The ancient symbol was small, no larger than a coin. But in that moment, it might as well have been a blazing fire. Kale's storm-gray eyes widened. His entire body went stiff as if struck by lightning. Impossible, he breathed. His voice was barely audible, but others had seen it too. A collective gasp rippled through the hall as vampire after vampire recognized the mark that had haunted their nightmares for centuries. Hunter! Someone screamed. She bears the mark of the order. Chaos erupted instantly. Vampires leaped from their seats, hissing and snarling. Their eyes blazed with bloodlust. Sarah scrambled backward. Her sleeve fell to cover the mark, but it was too late. The secret she guarded with her life was exposed. Kill her! Lord Kais roared, jumping over the table with inhuman speed. Kill the hunter spy! His claws were already out as he lunged for Sarah's throat, murder written across his cruel features. She rolled sideways, barely avoiding his strike. But she knew she was trapped. In seconds, they would tear her apart. Stop! The command rang out like thunder, freezing every vampire in place. King Kale had risen from his throne. His hand raised in a gesture of complete authority. The power in his voice was so overwhelming that even Kais stopped mid-attack, his claws inches from Sarah's face. Stand down, Kale said quietly. But his words carried the weight of 3 centuries of rule. All of you. My lord, Kais panted. Confusion was clear in his voice. She's a hunter. The mark proves it. She's been spying on us, gathering information for the resistance. You must do nothing without my command, Cale interrupted. His gaze never left Sarah's terrified face. There was something unreadable in his expression. Not anger, not hatred, but something far more complicated. This matter requires investigation. Lord Aldrich stepped forward, made bold by his drunken state. Investigation? My lord, the penalty for bearing the hunter's mark is death. It has always been death. To show mercy now would be seen as weakness by our enemies. The temperature in the hall dropped suddenly. Frost began forming on the cups as Cale's power radiated outward in waves of barely contained fury. Are you questioning my judgment, Aldrich? The Vampire King asked. His voice was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. Aldrich immediately dropped to one knee, trembling. No, my lord. Forgive me. I spoke out of turn. Cale's attention returned to Sarah. She remained frozen on the floor, her mind racing with desperate escape plans that all ended in death. The mark on her arm felt like it was burning, as if the ancient magic within it recognized the presence of its greatest enemy. Guards, Cale commanded without looking away from her. Escort our guest to my private chambers. See that she's comfortable. The assembled vampires erupted in shocked whispers. Comfortable? A hunter bearing the mark of the order was to be made comfortable? My lord, General Kais tried again. His voice was strained with barely controlled anger. Surely you cannot mean to. I mean to do exactly as I've commanded, Cale said. He finally broke eye contact with Sarah to sweep his gaze across the stunned assembly. Anyone who has a problem with my decisions is welcome to challenge me according to the old laws. The hall fell silent again. The old laws meant a fight to the death. No vampire had been foolish enough to challenge Cale in over a century, and none seemed willing to start now. Two royal guards approached Sarah carefully, as if she might explode at any moment. She allowed them to help her to her feet. Her legs shook with fear and terror. As they began to escort her toward the side entrance that led to the royal wing, she caught one last glimpse of King Cale. He was staring at her arm where the mark lay hidden. His jaw was tight and his eyes held secrets that might be older than the war itself. Whatever was about to happen, Sarah knew her life had just changed forever. The royal chambers were nothing like Sarah had expected. Instead of torture devices and blood-stained walls, she found herself in a surprisingly elegant room filled with ancient books, star charts, and oil paintings of landscapes she didn't recognize. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting warm light across Persian rugs and comfortable leather chairs. It felt more like a scholar's study than a vampire king's lair, but the man standing with his back to her, staring out the tall windows at the moonlit gardens, was unmistakably a predator. Sit, King Cale commanded without turning around. Sarah remained standing near the door. Every muscle was ready for flight, even though she knew escape was impossible. I prefer to stand, Your Majesty. A low chuckle escaped him. Still defiant, even facing certain death. Some things never change. There was something strange in his tone. Not the cold cruelty she had expected, but an odd mixture of pain and memory that made no sense. Sarah frowned, studying his stiff posture. You're going to kill me, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. So just get it over with. Finally, Cale turned to face her, and Sarah's breath caught. Up close, his beauty was even more devastating and more terrible. His storm-gray eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of suffering. There were lines around them that hadn't been visible from across the hall. That depends, he said quietly, on how you answer my questions. He moved to one of the leather chairs and motioned for her to take the one opposite. When she hesitated, his expression hardened slightly. I could have let Kais tear you apart in front of the entire court, he pointed out. The fact that you're still breathing suggests you might want to cooperate. Sarah reluctantly sat on the edge of the chair, ready to run at the first sign of danger. What do you want to know? Everything. Cale settled back in his chair, but his eyes never left her face. Your name, where you came from, how you got that mark, and most importantly, who sent you here. I'm just a servant, Sarah lied. I don't know what mark you're talking about. Don't. His voice cracked like a whip. Don't insult my intelligence. That mark has been burned into my memory for over 300 years. 300 years. Sarah's mind reeled. The Hunter's Order kept careful records, but their history only went back 2 centuries, to the founding after the Great Massacre. How could Cale have seen the mark before the order even existed? I can see the questions in your eyes, Cale continued, leaning forward slightly. You're wondering how I could possibly know about a mark that your precious order created, aren't you? The order didn't create the mark, Sarah said automatically, then cursed herself for revealing too much. No, Cale agreed. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They didn't. That mark is far older than your little rebellion. It belonged to someone else first. Someone who wore it with honor before your people twisted its meaning into something ugly. Despite her fear, curiosity got the better of her. What are you talking about? Cale stood suddenly and walked to a painting hanging above the fireplace. It showed a beautiful woman with long auburn hair and kind blue eyes, wearing a simple white dress. But what made Sarah's heart stop was the delicate silver mark clearly visible on the woman's inner wrist, identical to her own. Her name was Lyra, Cale said. His voice was heavy with old grief. She was human like you. A healer, not a hunter. And she wore that mark as a symbol of her calling to bridge the gap between our peoples. Sarah stared at the painting, her world tilting on its axis. That's impossible. The mark has always been a symbol of the hunt, of the war against vampires. Has it? Cale's laugh was bitter. Or is that simply what you've been told? He turned back to her, and for the first time Sarah saw raw pain in his immortal features. 3 centuries ago, before your endless war began, some of us believed in living together peacefully. Lyra was part of a group of humans and vampires working together for peace. The mark represented unity. The moon for vampires, the blade for protection, mixed together as equals. You're lying, Sarah whispered. But even as she said it, doubt crept into her voice. I loved her, Cale continued as if she hadn't spoken. For 50 years, we worked side by side to end the small conflicts between our peoples. We were close to achieving real peace. So close I could taste it. His hands clenched into fists. Then came the night of the crimson moon. Lyra led a group of humans to our settlement, acting like they were there to sign a peace treaty. Instead, they carried silver weapons blessed by their priests. They killed children, elders, anyone too weak to fight back. Sarah's blood ran cold. The great massacre was not vampires killing humans, Cale finished. His voice was sharp as a blade. It was humans killing vampires. Lyra herself drove a silver stake through my brother's heart while he slept, trusting in the peace we built. No, Sarah shook her head desperately. That's not how it happened. The histories say. The histories are lies. Cale's eyes blazed with fury and pain. Written by the survivors to justify their genocide. After that night, I swore never to trust another human. The war that followed, that was my response to their betrayal. Sarah felt sick. Everything she had been taught, everything she believed about her heritage and purpose, could it all be a lie? But the order's records were so detailed, so specific. Why are you telling me this? She managed to ask. Because, Cale said, studying her face with unsettling intensity, you have her eyes, her defiance. And that mark. He gestured toward her hidden arm. That mark should have died with her. So tell me, little hunter, how do you come to bear the symbol of the woman who destroyed everything I held dear? Sarah's mind raced. The mark had been passed down through her family line. Always hidden, always protected. Her grandmother had told her it came from the first hunters, but she had never mentioned anything about peace or unity. I don't know, she said honestly. My grandmother said it marked me as one of the chosen, that it would help me fulfill my destiny to end the vampire threat. Your grandmother, Cale repeated thoughtfully. What was her name? Elena Thorne. The color drained from Cale's already pale face. He staggered backward as if struck, gripping the fireplace for support. Elena, he breathed. Lyra's sister. She was supposed to be dead. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her, taught her to fight, filled her with purpose, had been sister to the woman in the painting. Sister to a woman who had apparently loved a vampire king. This changes nothing, Sarah said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. Even if what you're saying is true, vampires are still monsters. You still feed on humans, still enslave us. Do we? Cale asked quietly. Or have we simply become what you made us? What your people's betrayal forced us to become? As he spoke, Sarah noticed something that made her question everything once again. In the corner of the room sat a small table with children's toys, wooden horses and cloth dolls, clearly well loved. Whose toys are those? She asked. Cale followed her gaze, and his expression softened. Orphans from the war. Vampire children whose parents were killed in human raids. I look after them. A vampire king who cared for orphan children. A mark that supposedly meant unity, not war. A history that might be built on lies. Sarah's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. And she wasn't sure she wanted to know what truth lay beneath the rubble. The next 3 days passed like walking through a minefield. Sarah had been given quarters in the servants' wing, a small but comfortable room that felt more like a gilded cage. Guards were posted outside, supposedly for her protection. But she knew they were really there to keep her from escaping. Word of the hunter's mark had spread through the palace like wildfire. And the reaction was exactly what she had feared. Everywhere she went, conversation stopped. Eyes followed her. Whispers trailed in her wake. "The king has lost his mind," she overheard Lady Vivian hiss to her companion as they passed in the corridor. "Harboring a hunter is madness. How can we trust his judgment in the war if he shows mercy to our greatest enemies?" "Perhaps he plans to use her," Lord Matthias suggested, though his tone was doubtful. "Extract information about human strongholds, hunter techniques." "Then why hasn't he started the questioning? It's been 3 days and she still walks free." The king grows soft. Sarah kept her head down and continued walking, but their words echoed her own confusion. Why was Cale keeping her alive? After their conversation about Lyra and the true history of the mark, he had simply had her escorted to her room with instructions that she was to be treated as a guest. No torture, no demands for information, no attempts to use her against the human resistance. It made no sense. "You're the hunter girl." Sarah spun around to find a young vampire, barely out of his teens, blocking her path. His red eyes gleamed with mean excitement, and his fangs were already out in anticipation. "Lord Kais says you're responsible for the massacre at Millbrook," the boy continued, stepping closer. "That your kind butchered innocent vampire families while they slept." "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah replied carefully, though her hand instinctively moved toward the hidden silver blade in her boot. "Liar." The young vampire lunged forward. But before he could reach her, a firm hand grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. "Marcus," Cale's voice was deadly quiet. "What did I tell you about approaching our guest without permission?" The boy, Marcus, immediately dropped to one knee, his courage disappearing. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I only wanted to." "You wanted to disobey a direct order from your king," Cale interrupted. "Return to your studies now." As Marcus hurried away, Sarah found herself alone with Cale in the marble corridor. He looked tired, she realized. More tired than an immortal being should ever look. "Your popularity continues to rise," he said dryly. "Can you blame them?" Sarah shot back. "You're keeping their enemy in the heart of their home. Of course they're angry." "And what about you?" Cale asked, studying her face with those unsettling gray eyes. "Are you still convinced I'm your enemy?" Sarah wanted to say yes, to hold on to the certainty that had driven her entire life. But the past few days had shown her things that didn't fit the story she had been raised on. Yesterday, she had watched Cale personally care for a group of vampire children orphaned by the war. Not the cold calculation of a tyrant, but genuine care. This morning, she had overheard him arguing with his war council about finding alternatives to raiding human settlements. "I don't know what you are," she admitted, something that might have been approval flickered in his expression. "Good. Certainty is dangerous in times like these." Before she could ask what he meant, rapid footsteps echoed through the corridor. A vampire messenger appeared, bowing quickly to Cale. "Your Majesty, urgent news from the northern border." "Speak," Cale commanded. "The human settlement of Riverside has been destroyed, my lord." But the messenger hesitated, glancing nervously at Sarah. "She stays," Cale said firmly. "Continue." "The village wasn't attacked by our forces. When our patrols arrived to investigate reports of strange lights, they found only ash and bone. No survivors, no blood, no signs of feeding. And," he swallowed hard, "they found vampire bodies among the dead, my lord. Drained completely dry." Sarah felt ice form in her veins. This was the third such incident in as many weeks. Mixed attacks that eliminated both humans and vampires with surgical precision. "Any witnesses?" Cale asked. His voice was carefully controlled. "One, my lord. A human child found hiding in the woods. She speaks of figures in dark robes who moved like smoke and carried weapons that glowed with unnatural light. She said they spoke in a language she had never heard before." After dismissing the messenger, Kale turned to Sarah with grim eyes. Your people didn't do this. No, Sarah agreed. Her mind was racing. The Order doesn't use weapons that glow, and we would never work alongside vampires to attack a human settlement. This is something else entirely. Something that wants both our peoples dead. The question is why? Kale murmured. Over the following hours, Sarah found herself pulled into war councils she had no business attending. But Kale seemed determined to have her perspective, and gradually she began to see patterns that chilled her to the bone. Look at the timing, she said, spreading maps across the table in Kale's study. Every major escalation in the war has been preceded by one of these mixed attacks. The massacre that started the current conflict, the fall of Haven Valley, the destruction of the vampire stronghold at Blackmoor. All of them happened right after mysterious incidents that eliminated witnesses from both sides. Kale leaned over the maps. His shoulder brushed hers as he traced the patterns she had identified. Someone is orchestrating this, keeping us at each other's throats. But who benefits from endless war? Those who profit from it, came a new voice from the doorway. They both turned to see Lord Kais entering the study. His expression was troubled. Forgive the interruption, my lord. But I've been conducting my own investigation into these incidents. He placed a leather bag on the table and carefully pulled out several objects. Strange coins marked with symbols neither human nor vampire. Fragments of weapons made from unknown metals. And what looked like a piece of parchment covered in an alien script. These were found at the latest attack site, Kais explained. Hidden beneath the ashes, as if someone wanted them discovered eventually. Sarah picked up one of the coins, feeling an odd warmth coming from the metal. I've never seen anything like this. Nor have I, Kale admitted. But the implications are clear. There's a third faction in this war, one that's been playing us against each other for centuries. The question, Kais said grimly, is how deep their influence goes. How many of our conflicts have been manufactured? How many of our victories and losses were orchestrated by these puppeteers? As Sarah stared at the evidence before them, she felt the last of her certainties crumble away. The war she had been born to fight, the enemy she had been trained to hate. The very foundation of her existence, all of it might be built on lies, and if that was true, then everything she thought she knew about good and evil, about right and wrong, was about to change forever. 2 weeks of working alongside Kale had changed everything. Sarah found herself spending hours in his private study, poring over ancient texts and tracking the mysterious attacks that plagued both their peoples. What had started as grudging cooperation had evolved into something far more dangerous. Trust. Here, Kale said, pointing to a passage in an old vampire chronicle. This describes similar incidents from the early days of the war. Dark figures who spoke in tongues unknown, wielding weapons of ghostly flame. I thought it was mythology until now. Sarah leaned closer to read the faded text, very aware of the warmth coming from Kale's body. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing him as a monster and started noticing the small things. How he rubbed his temples when he was thinking. The way his eyes softened when he spoke about the orphan children. The careful gentleness in his hands when he handled ancient books. This dates back 300 years, she murmured. Right around the time of Lyra's betrayal. It wasn't betrayal, Kale said quietly, and Sarah looked up to find his gray eyes fixed on her face. I've had time to think about what you said about the histories being written by survivors. What if Lyra didn't choose to attack us? What if she was manipulated just like we've been manipulated ever since? The possibility hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. If Lyra had been innocent, if the centuries of war had been orchestrated from the shadows, then everything both their peoples believed was a lie. Tell me about her, Sarah said impulsively. About what it was like before. Kale was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens where ghost roses bloomed in eternal winter. She laughed at everything, he said finally. Even my terrible attempts at human humor. She loved these gardens. Said vampires needed beauty to remember what we were protecting. He paused. She made me believe I could be more than a weapon forged by centuries of conflict. What happened to that man? Sarah asked softly. He died with her. Kale's reflection in the glass looked haunted. Or so I thought. But these past weeks working with you. He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression made her heart race. You remind me of who I used to be, who I could be again. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Sarah knew she should step back, keep the distance that was safe for both of them. Instead, she moved closer. Kale, she whispered. And his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently traced the line of her cheek with his fingertips. His touch was surprisingly warm for a creature of the undead. "This is madness," he murmured, but he didn't pull away. "Complete madness," Sarah agreed. Her pulse thundered as she looked up into his storm-gray eyes. The moment stretched between them, electric and impossible. Then reality crashed back as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. They sprang apart just as Lord Kais entered the study. His expression was dark with suspicion. "My lord," he said. His gaze flicked between them with obvious displeasure. "The War Council is ready to meet." "Of course," Kale replied. His mask of cold authority slid back into place so smoothly that Sarah wondered if she had imagined the tender moment they had shared. "We'll continue this research later." As they filed into the council chamber, Sarah couldn't help but notice the hostile looks directed her way. The vampire nobles clearly resented her presence in their sacred planning sessions. But Kale's authority kept them silent. "The human resistance has taken 3 more border settlements," General Mordain reported, spreading maps across the black table. "They're growing bolder, my lord. Some say it's because they believe you've gone soft." "Let them believe what they will," Kale replied coolly. "What matters is stopping these shadow attacks before they destroy both our peoples." "With respect, your majesty," Lord Aldrich interrupted. "Perhaps we should focus on the enemy we know rather than chasing ghosts. The humans grow stronger while we waste time on conspiracy theories." Sarah felt tension coil in her stomach. There was something in Aldrich's tone that suggested this wasn't merely disagreement. It was challenge. "Are you questioning my judgment?" Kale asked. His voice was deceptively calm. "I'm questioning your priorities," Aldrich replied boldly. "You refuse to authorize the final assault on the human strongholds. You spare their settlements when we could crush them completely. And you keep a hunter at your side like some kind of pet." His sneer was directed at Sarah. "Some wonder if the king of vampires has forgotten which side he serves." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Sarah could see frost forming on the water goblets as Kale's power responded to his anger. "I serve the future of our people," Kale said quietly. "Not the bloodlust of fools who mistake brutality for strength." "The old ways kept us strong," General Mordain added, emboldened by Aldrich's defiance. "Perhaps it's time to return to them." Sarah's blood chilled as she realized what she was witnessing. This wasn't just disagreement about strategy. It was the beginning of a revolt. These vampires were questioning Kale's right to rule. And her presence was the spark they needed to justify their rebellion. "I think," Kale said with deadly softness, "this council has forgotten the price of treason." But as his loyalists and enemies stared each other down across the table, Sarah understood with crystal clarity that the political knives were already being sharpened. Kale's protection of her, his refusal to wage total war against humanity, had marked him as weak in the eyes of his own people. She had come here to kill a monster and end a war. Instead, she had found a man trying to save 2 worlds. And her feelings for him might be the very thing that destroyed him. The forbidden bond between them wasn't just dangerous because of what their peoples would think. It was dangerous because it made them both vulnerable to the real enemies lurking in the shadows. Waiting for the perfect moment to strike, the attack came at dawn, when both vampire and human defenses were at their weakest. Sarah jolted awake to the sound of explosions echoing across the palace grounds. Through her window, she could see unnatural green flames eating the eastern wing, and the screams of both vampires and humans filled the air. She grabbed her weapons and burst into the corridor to find chaos. Palace guards ran in every direction, shouting conflicting orders while servants fled in terror. The sharp smell of burning stone and something else, something that made her skin crawl, filled the air. "Sarah." Kale's voice cut through the confusion. He appeared at the end of the hallway, his usual composure shattered. Blood stained his coat, and his eyes blazed with fury. "We're under attack. Something's breached the outer defenses." "The Shadow Faction?" she asked, falling into step beside him as they raced toward the sounds of battle. "Has to be. But the timing," his jaw clenched. "They hit the human settlement of Mill Haven at the exact same moment. Coordinated to make it look like we're attacking each other. They burst onto the main battlements to find a nightmare in progress. Dark figures in flowing robes moved through the palace grounds like ghosts, wielding weapons that glowed with the same ghostly light Sarah had seen described in the reports. But these weren't just attacking vampires. Human servants were being cut down with equal brutality. There. Cale pointed to a group of robed attackers cornering a cluster of vampire children near the gardens. Without hesitation, he leaped from the battlements. His vampire speed allowed him to land gracefully 30 feet below. Sarah followed, using a rope to lower herself down the wall. By the time she reached the ground, Cale was already fighting 3 of the attackers. His movements were a deadly blur of precision and power. The robed figures fought unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. They moved with inhuman grace but lacked the raw physicality of vampires. Their weapons, curved blades that seemed to be made of solid moonlight, could hurt vampires. Despite their supernatural toughness. One of the attackers broke away from Cale and came for Sarah. She drew her silver dagger and met the creature head-on, quickly realizing that her hunter training was perfectly suited to fight these beings. Whatever they were, they had vampire-like weaknesses to silver. "Behind you!" she shouted, spotting another attacker flanking Cale. He spun and caught the creature's blade with his bare hands. His vampire strength allowed him to snap the ghostly weapon like a twig. The attacker shrieked, a sound like breaking glass, and dissolved into shadow. Working together, they cleared the garden area and got the children to a secure location. But the coordinated nature of the attack was becoming clearer with each passing moment. "They're not trying to win," Sarah realized as they regrouped near the fountain. "They're putting on a show." Cale's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "Look at the pattern. They attack vampires in front of human witnesses. Humans in front of vampire witnesses. Maximum chaos. Maximum blame between our peoples." Her blood ran cold as the full meaning hit her. "This isn't about destroying us. It's about making sure we destroy each other." As if summoned by her words, a new voice rang out across the battlefield, amplified by some kind of magic so that every surviving soul in the palace could hear it clearly. "Behold the alliance of monsters," the voice proclaimed. "See how the vampire king protects his human pet while his people burn." Sarah spun toward the source of the voice and felt her world tilt. Standing on the palace's central tower was a figure she recognized, Lord Victor, one of Cale's most trusted generals, who was supposed to be leading the defense of the northern borders, but beside him stood someone who made her blood freeze in her veins. Commander Marcus Thorne, her own cousin and one of the highest-ranking members of the Hunter's Order. "No," she whispered, but even as denial escaped her lips, the pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. "Citizens of both realms," Victor continued. His voice carried easily across the battlefield. "Witness the corruption of your leaders. The vampire king chooses human love over vampire survival, while the hunters hide their true nature behind noble lies." Marcus stepped forward, and Sarah could see the cruel smile on his face even from this distance. "The time for half measures is over. Only through eternal conflict can both species reach their true potential. Only through endless war can the strong survive." The robed attackers began withdrawing as suddenly as they had appeared, fading into shadows and leaving behind carefully placed evidence. Vampire weapons near human bodies, hunter silver near vampire corpses, and scattered papers that would undoubtedly prove secret alliances between various factions. "They've been playing both sides," Cale said. His voice was hollow with realization. "For centuries," Sarah's hand shook as she pulled out a piece of parchment that had been dropped near her feet. It bore official Hunter's Order seals and detailed plans for tonight's attack, plans that made it look like she was a willing spy sent to weaken vampire defenses from within. "The mark," she breathed. Understanding flooded through her. "They used Lyra's mark to frame her, just like they're using mine to frame me now." Cale nodded grimly. "A symbol of peace transformed into a weapon of war. They've been manufacturing our hatred for 300 years, profiting from the blood and suffering of both our peoples." As dawn broke over the devastated palace, Sarah realized that everything she believed about her purpose, her heritage, and her enemies had been a carefully constructed lie. The real enemy wasn't vampires or humans. It was the puppet masters who had been pulling their strings all along, and now those puppet masters were ready for the final act. The Great Hall had been transformed into a court of judgment. Every vampire noble, general, and courtier in the kingdom had gathered within hours of the attack. They filled the vast space like a sea of pale faces and burning eyes. Their voices raised in angry accusation. At the center of it all, Sarah knelt in silver chains before the black throne. while Kale stood trial for treason against his own people. You have betrayed everything we stand for, Lord Aldrich's voice rang out above the crowd. While our enemies plot our destruction, you play house with a hunter spy. She saved vampire children during the attack, Kale replied coldly. But his words were drowned out by jeers and hissing. General Mordain stepped forward. His ancient face was twisted with disgust. The evidence is clear, my lord. Plans bearing her mark detail every weakness in our defenses. She has been feeding information to the human resistance for months. Sarah tried to speak, to explain that the documents were forgeries, but the silver gag prevented any sound. The chains burned against her skin, sapping her strength and leaving her helpless to defend herself or Kale. And what of the witnesses? Lady Vivian added. Her voice was sharp as a blade. 3 servants saw you fighting alongside her, protecting her over your own generals. You chose a human over vampires, my lord. That is the definition of treason. The crowd erupted in agreement. Their bloodlust was palpable. Sarah could see the political calculation in their eyes. They had found the perfect excuse to remove a king they saw as weak and replace him with someone more willing to wage total war. I have heard enough, Lord Kais announced. Stepping into the circle of judgment. Sarah's heart sank as she realized that even Kale's most trusted ally had turned against him. By the ancient laws of our people, I call for the trial of blood and oath. The hall fell silent. The trial of blood and oath was the oldest vampire tradition. A ritual combat where the king's right to rule could be challenged in single combat. If Kale lost, he would die, and leadership would pass to the victor. You invoke the old ways against me? Kale asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. I invoke justice, Kais replied. Prove your loyalty to our people. Prove that you deserve to lead us. Fight for your crown or step down and face exile. Kale's storm-gray eyes swept across the assembled vampires, reading the hunger for violence in their faces. Sarah could see the calculation in his expression. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and politically isolated, but when his gaze found hers, she saw something else entirely. Determination. I accept, he said. His voice carried to every corner of the hall. But I invoke my right to set the terms. This trial isn't just about my crown. It's about her life. He pointed to Sarah. If I prove my strength and loyalty through combat, she goes free. And if you lose? Aldrich asked with obvious anticipation. If I lose, you can have us both. The ritual circle was cleared within minutes. Ancient runes were carved into the stone floor with silver knives, creating a sacred space where only truth could survive. Sarah was moved to the edge of the circle, still chained, but now able to see everything that would unfold. Kale's first challenger was General Mordain, an ancient vampire whose speed and strength had been legendary for over 1,000 years. The 2 warriors circled each other like predators, then exploded into motion. The battle was brutal and elegant, a dance of death that showed centuries of combat experience. Mordain was fast, but Kale was faster. When the ancient general finally fell, his neck broken by Kale's bare hands, the crowd's bloodlust only grew. Next. Kale called, not even breathing hard. 3 more challengers came forward in succession. Lord Aldrich lasted barely a minute before Kale's claws opened his throat. A young vampire named Stefan managed to wound Kale's shoulder before being stabbed on the king's outstretched fingers. Lady Vivian actually drew blood from Kale's cheek before he snapped her spine with a movement too fast for human eyes to follow. By the time Lord Kais stepped into the circle, Kale was bleeding from multiple wounds but still standing tall. The 2 oldest friends in the vampire court faced each other across the ritual space. I take no pleasure in this, Kais said quietly. Nor do I, Kale replied. But some things are worth fighting for. Their battle was the longest and most vicious yet. These were warriors who knew each other's every technique, every weakness. They fought with the desperate fury of brothers torn apart by beliefs. Each strike carrying the weight of centuries of friendship now turned to bitter necessity. When Kais finally fell, his heart pierced by Kale's claws, the hall was silent except for the king's labored breathing. Anyone else? Kale asked. His voice was rough but unbroken. No one moved. No one spoke. Then from somewhere in the crowd, a silver dagger slid across the stone floor to stop at Sarah's feet. Her chains had been unlocked during the final battle. She was free to move, free to choose. The trial demands completion, a voice called out. Let the hunter prove her loyalty. To us or to him. Sarah picked up the silver blade. Its weight was familiar in her hands. This was the moment she had trained for her entire life. The chance to strike down the Vampire King and end the war forever. Kale stood before her, wounded and exhausted, making no move to defend himself. His eyes held no fear, only acceptance and something that looked remarkably like love. "Choose," he said simply. The blade trembled in Sarah's grip as two destinies warred within her heart. The silver blade caught the torchlight as Sarah raised it high. Every eye in the hall fixed upon her trembling hand. Time seemed frozen in that crystal moment. Centuries of hatred and war balanced on the edge of a knife. Then she spun away from Kale and threw the dagger into the crowd. The blade struck true, burying itself in the chest of a vampire lord who had been creeping closer with his own weapon drawn. He crumpled to the floor, revealing the poison-tipped stake he had intended to drive into Kale's back while all attention was on Sarah. "The true enemy has never been vampires or humans." Sarah's voice rang out clear and strong across the stunned assembly. "For 300 years, we've been dancing to someone else's tune, spilling blood to line their pockets and serve their twisted agenda." She strode to the center of the ritual circle. Her chin raised defiantly. "I am Sarah Thorne, bearer of the Hunter's Mark. And I choose to break the cycle of lies that has destroyed both our peoples." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Confusion replaced bloodlust as her words sank in. "You saw the evidence tonight," Sarah continued. Her voice grew stronger. "Vampires and humans working together to orchestrate attacks on both sides. They wear our faces, speak our languages, and sign our names to declarations of war we never made. How many of your loved ones died fighting enemies who were never your true threat?" Lord Aldrich, still alive despite his throat wound, struggled to his feet. "Pretty words from a spy." "Then explain this." Kale's voice cut through the hall as he produced the alien artifacts they had discovered. The strange coins and weapons gleamed with otherworldly light, clearly not of vampire or human origin. "Explain how a human hunter came to possess information that helped us identify the real puppet masters." A young vampire near the back of the crowd stepped forward hesitantly. "My lord, during the attack, I saw something." One of the robed figures dropped his hood when he thought no one was looking. "It was Commander Draven, your own cousin, supposedly killed in battle 5 years ago. And I recognized one of the human attackers," added a palace servant. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "My brother Marcus, who I was told died in a vampire raid last winter. But there he was, fighting alongside creatures that killed humans and vampires alike." The revelations came faster now as more witnesses found the courage to speak. Stories of supposedly dead relatives fighting for the Shadow faction. Evidence of coordinated attacks that blamed both sides. A pattern of manipulation stretching back generations. "Enough," Kale said. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and grief. "We have all been fools, myself included. The question now is whether we choose to remain fools or finally see the truth." He extended his hand to Sarah, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Together, they faced the assembled court. "I propose an alliance," Kale announced. "Not between master and servant, conqueror and conquered, but between equals fighting a common enemy. Those who wish to continue the old ways of endless war may leave now with safe passage. Those who choose to build something new, stay." The hall erupted in arguments, accusations, and heated debate. But gradually a pattern emerged. The younger vampires, those who had grown tired of constant conflict, began moving toward the center of the hall. Some of the older nobles walked away in disgust, but others remained, their ancient faces thoughtful. Over the following weeks, what became known as the Blood and Silver Accords took shape. Human settlements that had been under vampire control were granted self-rule in exchange for voluntary blood donations from willing donors. Vampire strongholds opened their libraries and healing knowledge to human scholars. Joint patrols hunted down the Shadow faction with ruthless efficiency. The war didn't end overnight. There were setbacks, betrayals, and moments when everything nearly collapsed. But each victory against their true enemies strengthened the fragile alliance. Commander Marcus Thorne and Lord Victor fell in a final battle at their hidden fortress, their conspiracy dying with them. Documents found in their stronghold revealed the stunning scope of their manipulation. False flag operations, manufactured atrocities, and carefully orchestrated escalations that had kept two peoples at each other's throats for centuries. 3 months after the trial of Blood and Oath, Sarah stood beside Kale on the palace balcony, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She no longer wore servant's clothes or chains, but a dress of deep blue silk that marked her as Kale's equal and partner. Any regrets? Kale asked softly. His arm was around her waist. About which part? Sarah smiled. Choosing to trust a vampire king? Or discovering that everything I thought I knew was a lie? About this, he said, lifting her hand to his lips and gently kissing the silver mark on her inner wrist. The ancient symbol seemed to shimmer in the morning light. No longer a brand of war but a bridge between worlds. Where once it had represented division and hatred, it now stood for unity and hope. None, Sarah whispered, leaning into his embrace as dawn broke fully over a landscape where humans and vampires worked side by side in the fields below. The war was over. The real war could finally begin.